Brandon,
Hey, Alan.
and welcome to Dice Over Everything.
So, if we tell people we're master tacticians at Infinity, do you think anyone would believe us?
Yes, if they don't know us and haven't seen us play.
Yeah,
Hey, that's most people, right?
yes. All right. So they probably clicked on it and they still believe us
Y-
until they listen to the very end of the episode. Then they'll know, right? They'll have to listen to the
yes,
very.
that's right. So today's topic is Infinity N4, the new edition. Thoughts by Master Tacticians, and that's us.
Yeah. So we'll be talking about, I guess, where we see the changes taking the direction of the game,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll probably be leaving out tactics because tactics are off on the board, and we haven't been playing because things.
Yeah. So um, these thoughts basically are about the new edition of Infinity, which is one of our favorite games. And they came out with a new edition, which I've been like super stoked for. N4.
Yep. So I think we like a fair amount of where it's taken the direction of the game, especially on the
Yep.
simplifying aspects of it,
Mm-hmm.
which we can get into all those. But as sort of the overarching
Mm-hmm.
way that it's changed, a lot of things have become simpler. So what would you say like the biggest thing that's become simpler is?
Yeah. So if I were to look at it, um, N3, so the previous edition of Infinity, started getting like too large. It was already a large and complicated game, and just over the years, like with the expansions, they've added more and more rules, and it became more and more complicated. And almost like it's very hard. I saw definitely at the very end of N3, there were a bunch of people who would get into the game because let's like the models are amazing, right? Still amazing, still in my opinion the best on the market in terms of the look, but the game and I think the game is also one of the best on the market, but it was just too complicated for people who tried to get in.
Yeah,
So
there was no one book for people to read through and get a
mhm,
grasp of the rules because things had been modified so many times through either extra books or the wiki,
mhm,
FAQs, that at some point somebody who didn't have any friends in the game, who just
uh-huh,
tried to pick it up on their own and teach their friends, would
mhm.
have no set way of learning the rules.
Yeah, so I feel like there are two tracks that became really confusing. Is there's the main rules, which already are very different than other games because I think we've talked about this before. The order system and the order and ARO system is very different than other games, right? And mutual awareness and things like this. So that already is kind of a hump, and that's honestly one of the things that, though, because it's so different and interesting, it's what attracts people. The problem I feel like was the second hump, which was the amount of rules and special rules in the game was just like too much, and the amount of options someone had, like
Yep.
a lot of them being meaningless, was too much, and there was too many rules that you couldn't see clearly when you saw someone because there was
Yeah,
a lot
so
of yep.
so I guess one of those things that you're going towards is the nested rules.
Yeah. Like, what does
Yep.
it mean? Like, when they talked about a guy who has martial arts, there were like four or five sub rules. And then when you use martial arts, you had four different options of how you use them, even though technically you almost always just used one. So it was like a fake choice because, like, you had three quasi options and one real option.
Yeah, so martial arts gives you bonuses in close combat, but then they also went and created things like Protheon
Mm-hmm.
and a few
Guard.
others. Guard, yeah, they also gave you different bonuses in close combat. So you would have to
Mm-hmm.
learn several different skills and their bonuses for close combat
Yeah.
rather than just having one martial arts set of rules that gives you your bonuses when you fight up.
Yeah, so it wasn't about like when oftentimes because there are so many things, it's hard to see what's going on, which basically means I think we've talked about this before, just like the cognitive load of a game. Like if you're spending so much time on your cognitive load, or you can't even like it's so complicated you can't even load in the entire game state, you end up losing not because you didn't understand like you didn't do the right tactics, it's because you didn't understand the actual game state, right? And
Yep.
so it kind of, because it was so complicated, the more complicated a game is, the more it rewards just good, not good gameplay, but good memorization, right? And
Basically.
don't get me wrong, some people love it, right? It's the whole arcane spells thing we talked about before, where like, oh, I have arcane knowledge, therefore I can defeat you, is a very, like, there's some enjoyment out of that, right? When it's kind of like trivia, right? It's a trivia game. At that point, your benefit and the joy you're getting is knowing something that your opponent did not, which is the trivia joy. And don't get me wrong, I like trivia games. I like playing Trivial Pursuit or going to a pub and having a pub quiz night, but it's not necessarily what I want when I'm playing a game, a miniatures game, right? I'm there for the strategy or the cool kind of layering on that kind of stuff, which is not the arcane spells trivia kind of enjoyment. And I feel
not studying up in between games to feel like you can understand what's happening.
Yeah, you know more. Yeah, just so you can understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And like in a lot of those games, each unit and stuff will have maybe like 12 special rules for that unit, which Infinity characters, to be fair, will have close to that level, but just the level of complication of the abilities that Infinity models have, it's basically more of they're modifications for the most part. A few of them give you situational abilities, but for the most part, they're just modifications.
Like so you're saying like a +3 or a -3 in this situation.
Yeah, so they're not all that complicated to learn. So there might be a whole bunch of them on each character, but unlike in other games where it might give you an entire, like you might have several spells you can perform or things like that, just the complexity of the abilities is graspable.
So yeah, it's like you need to know in which situations you have advantage. That's basically generally what the abilities do. It's like, if you're in this situation, you have an advantage. If you're in this situation, you have an advantage. And you're trying to layer over enough situations where you have more advantages than your opponent, right? Yep. So it's not necessarily as like, oh, you can cast different spells that do different things, which like we said, Frostgrave is, another of our favorite games. That's what that one's about, right? Different spells that do different things. But because of that, like with Infinity, because it's just like advantages, it's a little bit easier to understand if you just have, instead of like nesting rules where you have like martial arts gives also stealth, and it also gives courage, right? There's these nested rules. If they're all just listed, like when you're looking at a unit's profile, especially as a new person, you don't know, right? It's not bubbled up that these are two situations where that unit is good, right? So they just kind of either don't know it because they just don't know that, let's say, the opponent they're attacking is actually good because they have martial arts. Oh, they have courage and stealth, right? They don't know that, so they don't necessarily resolve it. Whereas now, if you look at a profile, because those are all separated, when a player looks at a unit, they're like, oh, okay, so this has martial arts, which gives them +- in close combat, makes sense. It also then, if they have stealth or courage, it'll literally list there. So it's like, these are the 5, 10, 12, 10 situations or 10 things that I need to be aware of. You don't get it's easier for people at a glance know what units are good and bad at.
Yep, you don't have to go refer to other things quite as much. I mean, you have to refer to the weapons, but at least the weapons are common throughout most units.
And I think one of the good things about that, though, without the nesting, is it probably is a signal to the creators that some of these units have way too many special rules. Because if you look at martial arts, it's not just one special rule. Technically, it's 3, right?
Yep.
And so...
Oh, yeah. When Bostro was doing some of his just previewing things, he's like, oh, this thing's almost running out of space for abilities. Oh, wow. There's a lot of these.
Yeah, so now if you're like, oh, I'm going to make a guy with a bunch of, like a guy, and I'm going to add, let's say, Tio Camo, martial arts, and I don't know, some other kind of abilities, right? It looks like not that many, but it's literally like each of those is actually 3 abilities. And then when you put them all together, you're like, oh, actually even though I thought I only had a character with 4 abilities, which seems manageable, it's actually 12 abilities. And maybe I shouldn't give this character 12 abilities. That's too many.
Yep.
I don't know if they actually did that because there's some units that have like 12 abilities. So.
They just released them.
Yeah. So, but at least it kind of bubbles up and you can kind of see that better. So that I feel like is really good in terms of if you're getting into the game and you kind of bounced off of Infinity because things were harder to understand, right? Right? There's all of these, like someone would say, "Oh, I have martial arts," and then you also have to know martial arts, stealth, and courage, right? And
Yep.
you kind of just have to memorize that. Now it's like, oh, well, if you want to know what this character has, I have martial arts, stealth, and courage. Or a
Mhm.
lot of people don't have all three, right?
Yep. Same thing with being remotes. Like being remotes would grant you a whole bunch of abilities,
Mm-hmm.
but you wouldn't like remote presence. But
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to go look at all those rules, then figure out what those meant.
Yeah. So
Now,
I
remote
feel
presence only does one thing, and then the other abilities are pulled out.
yeah. So it does allow them to like give fewer abilities to people. I do know because of the transfer of the game, they haven't quite. They've done a little bit of that, but I feel like not enough. But that's a good direction at least, and it does, I
Yep.
think, make
No.
it easier for people to look at it.
Yeah, it's good for new players, which is it doesn't take away from the old players' fun of playing the game. Plus, just from a fluff element, like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when they gave the name for an ability, it wouldn't actually make sense.
Mm.
Like if they had, say, the like kinematica or something,
Mm-hmm.
but like why use that word when maybe the thing's just like rather than being good at dodging, let's just
Mm-hmm.
say small or something like that. So it's hard to hit. But
Oh, so
something
like
like
they hid the actual like an easy to understand ability behind a name, which is a cool name and it's fluffy, but it actually makes it harder for a new player to see what it actually does.
well, I'm saying it might be fluffy for some things, but it might
Mhm.
actually be not fluffy for other things because it doesn't make sense for why they have that ability.
Yeah. So what do you mean, like kinematica? That was
Yeah,
your.
just for some things of why something has that particular ability. Like things being religious. It's like, well, okay, they're religious because they're part of this like cult thing.
Uh huh.
But then other things, their fluff maybe, oh, they behave this way, but it's they behave in the religious way, but not because of their like beliefs. It might just be the training.
I think no religious. They still have religious,
Yeah, I don't
and
know.
it's literally characters that are religious. So I
Yeah.
don't know. Is that a good or a bad thing? So you're saying that in some ways it's bad because they still have it.
Mhm. But at least some
Yeah.
things got rid of it, so it doesn't have
Yeah.
that name anymore.
To me, one of the things is like martial arts.
Hmm.
Martial arts does not mean you're stealthy. Training in stealth means you're stealthy. A
Oh yeah,
thief
you could be a
is
giant
stealthy.
robot. Yeah, you could
Yeah.
be a giant martial artist robot, and that's definitely earth shaking and not stealthy at all.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you are let's say you trained on the sword, on the art of the sword, right? You're a knight. That doesn't mean you're stealthy. Nobody, like the basic training of being a fencer or a knight is not about being quiet, right? But that's still a
Mhm.
martial art, right? You should be good at close combat. You should have artist skills, but none of that involves sneaking around.
Nope.
Like a
Nope.
ninja, like a samurai is not about sneaking around.
Yeah, they have
A
big armor there.
Yeah, but they're very good at martial arts. Not the same thing, but on the other hand, a ninja is supposed to be good at both. But the stealth part is entirely separate from the kicking a guy in the face part.
Yeah, and you might have sort of infiltrators who are quiet at moving around. Like
Mm-hmm.
they start up the field, but they're just good at shooting things. They're not good at fighting, but they're good at
Yeah.
sneaking around. Hmm.
So, um, yeah. So I feel like it in that way it was good that they broke those things up. Now, I do want to go into one thing that is not necessarily as good because even though I feel like this is a thing. So they'd be trying to simplify things, break things up, make things more clear. But I do feel like overall they didn't go far enough.
Well, I think with the number of units, that's we've addressed it for several games, but they haven't
Mm-hmm.
reduced the number of units. They increased the number of units, which in and of itself increases the complexity of the game because now there's more to memorize. And now they
Mm-hmm.
have more things in each faction. A lot of them start to overlap more.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I would have hoped that some things would have gotten removed at this stage because it's exactly when a new rule set comes out.
Yeah, so this is one of those things I think we've talked about a lot. Like one of the issues with War Machine, Privateer Bress's game, so War Machine and Hordes, is that it started out tight with a smaller number of guys, and it was a really good rule set. I think it was interesting and everything. But as they got bigger, they just kept on adding units and units, and it just got too unwieldy, and it kind of crushed the game because there's just too many units to remember. And that game is all about gotchas, so. It was too much, right? Especially in terms of SKUs. And we talked about how Games Workshop did a really, really good job because that we used to think that it was bad that Games Workshop would just like sunset units, and technically it is somewhat bad, right? For the short term, but for the long term health of the game, you have to be able to sunset things because games at a certain size are just too big, right? And we mentioned that we're really happy with Infinity, where Infinity has actually sunset a bunch of different factions, kind of, right?
Yeah, a few things here and there. Not very many things.
But so that's the question: is like I guess this is a thing that we looked at with N4. The N4 is a great chance to sunset a bunch of more things, right? You have a new edition, you can eliminate a lot of stuff and keep a smaller core so that you can build up on it, right? Remember when you have a new edition, it's not like they release a new edition and that's it, right? They still need to release expansions. So right now, they've reduced the SKUs and the amount to, I'd say, a manageable amount, right? But it's not enough if you're talking about building back up, right? It's already in my opinion, it's already too big, right? They added an entirely new faction, O12, right? So now how many factions are they at? 9 or something?
Yeah, and for the major factions, they might have added 4 new things for all the major factions as part of this update. No, maybe not even including characters, because several characters have come out on top of that.
More than 4, I think.
So.
But the question is, did they remove 4? Or actually, because they want to have room to build, they should remove more than 4. Right. Yeah. But they kind of didn't do that. And I do agree. Like for us, we're veterans who play the game all the time, but the game does still seem too big relative to a new player.
Yeah. And I guess one way of determining if it's too big or not is, I guess what we saw in War Machine was that there'd be certain units for doing certain things. Like you'd have good things for doing like reach, which is attacking within further in melee. That you would have a couple of those in your faction, but there'd just be one clear good one. Mm-hmm. So you would only play with that one. And the others would be kind of just wasted space in the game. And then now that there's so many units.
False choices, basically. They look like they're choices, but actually there's one clear choice that you shouldn't use if you want to, I guess, win, right?
Yeah, if you want to min-max your army rather than make it a theme, then there's just things that won't get used, yet they're there taking up space in your mind and in the game.
And in the SKU line as well.
Yep, and on store shelves, yep.
Yeah, so I feel like Code 1, which is Infinity's or Corvus Belli's intro version of Infinity, in a lot of ways did a lot more right because they did try to boil the game down to a much smaller, manageable thing that can fit as a SKU line on a store shelf, right? Mm-hmm. But the question is, when you have the more expanded line with N4, it's like you could call it the historical line or whatever you want to say, or is that too much? Is that too big? Like, yeah, they reduced things. They did get rid of a couple of units that I enjoyed, right? But as long as that, like you said, as long as they have a unit of that type, it's not necessarily a big deal in Infinity because they have these very lax proxy rules, right? Like
when you've got a big base guy with an HMG in that one faction, he's got the look of, say, Nomads. You just use him as the other, like, large silhouette heavy guy.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to be confused.
Yeah. And especially because, well, one of those profiles doesn't have a profile anymore, right? So, like, for example, in my faction, I really, really like the Azrael, right? Now, the Azrael doesn't have a profile anymore. Their sculpts are amazing, right? They're my favorite heavy infantry sculpt. but because they have no profile, if I put an Azrael on the table and I tell everyone, oh, this is an Alpha Seed now, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to be like, oh, but it looks like an Azrael. Like, no one's going to say that.
Yeah,
because
there's no
Azrael doesn't. Exactly. There's no Azrael in the game. So obviously it's another unit, right?
Yep.
And the Alpha Seed is the closest unit to the Azrael. So it's not a big deal to kind of do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It just gives you better proxy options. If you really like the look of the model, you can now proxy to more things.
So to me, I feel like they could have gone further, but they did not. Like, don't get me wrong, I like the fact that they have all these new profiles. In fact, the new profiles are in many ways the things I'm most excited about, besides rejig profiles. But I don't mind if they could have removed more profiles and just folded them in. I think we've mentioned this many times where you can have where I think in some ways they've done this, like with the Azrael, right? Where they've basically said unofficially, this is the replacement unit for the Azrael, right? Or for whatever unit. And so if you have those old models, you're probably going to end up proxying them for this unit, right? And just kind of cycle it that way. So you're constantly getting new units, new things to be interesting about. But then you do have a choice. You're removing these other options. So you're not filling your SKU line and everything like that.
So I think maybe their goal was not to offend the current players. Because also one big thing we were hoping would change, but they've left open to change, is the fire team rules. Because they didn't even put them into the rule book. That was a new addition, and they made it clear from before the book was being released that they would leave that in a separate PDF document to leave it more open to future changes. So basically, that looks like a goal of just not offending the current players by upsetting how the game looks currently. Which, to be fair, from the reactions, people have not become upset. So maybe it is the right strategy to get people to transition to the new edition, be really enthusiastic about it, which will get more new players in, and then start doing the more uncomfortable things to the game
over time. Oh, yeah. I see. So what you're saying is instead of like, so the way I'm thinking about it is like, cut everything now and then grow it. But maybe the better strategy is very, very small cuts. So like whenever, so right now they cut a bunch of profiles so they can add a bunch of profiles. And then in 6 months, what you're saying is instead of saying, we're going to cut up a whole bunch so we have room to grow, basically whenever they add something, they remove something. So 6 months from now, they're going to remove 3 or 4 profiles and insert 3 or 4 new profiles.
Yeah, so they're basically boiling the frog slowly so that
Yeah, maybe. You know what? Maybe that is a good point, and maybe that is the better strategy. I do know that when they did the whole so Corvus Belli is not afraid to shake things up, I guess, but maybe they're more afraid now. I don't know. But historically, they have not been. They literally cut out a huge set of guys from one of their factions. Yep. So that you can no longer use them in that faction. And they put it into its own special mini faction, right? So basically Yujing, which is like Space China. They say it's Space Asia, but it's really Space China. And Space China was, in the fluff, also had a sub-faction of Space Japan. But in their story, there's tension there. So obviously Space Japan seceded. Right? And then basically everyone who had all of these Japanese units in their Space China force, they got really upset because they're like, well, you just like split my faction. And the Space Japan units, like it used to be Space Asia more because it was China and Japan. Then they cut out Japan. So literally it was just Space China.
Well,
and that was like one third of the units was Space Japan.
Yeah.
And they cut all of that out. So everyone lost like 1/3 of their units.
Yeah. So who knows if it was just the complainers are always the most vocal people. But from the people we know who play Space Japan.
I was complaining. I was Space China and I couldn't use any of my Space Japan units.
Well, that's what you get for abusing Space Japan. For everyone else who doesn't
play I liked them. I loved my Space Japan units. I was going to get more Space Japan units. And to be fair, like, at that time, it was like it wasn't 1/3. I had like 1/5 of my units were Space Japan.
Yep.
Now they're just in the garbage. And I kept one model on my shelf.
Yeah. Well, Everybody
I
else
guess
probably
it worked. It worked. They made me throw out my old models, and now I
go
have.
back and get some more. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I gotta go buy new models.
Exactly. Yeah, well, it keeps the game more interesting that way. As long as it's not your only and first faction. That's jarring to those people, but for everybody else who's been established, it shouldn't be that jarring to them.
Yeah. So back to N4. So we're saying maybe these small cuts, maybe the fact that they don't have enough room was actually a good thing, as long as they consistently shift those things, right, and keep their SKU lists at a manageable size. I guess the big thing is that with N4, we were hoping, you and I, it sounds like, that even like the size that it is right now, we would prefer it to be smaller.
Yeah.
So
Well,
if they had cut an entire faction, I would be okay with it.
yeah, we know what faction that would be, but we're just not going to say it right now.
Okay, we'll say it later.
That's speculation, not talking about what's real. So I guess the other really, really big change was the reduction to the 15 model slot count.
I would say that's actually kind of slid in as a side change, but I think in terms of gameplay, it's the biggest, one of the biggest.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so I feel like in terms of the main rule set, I think if you heard us our talk about Code One, a lot of the changes that are good overall in streamlining, simplifying things, cleaning up rules, they all happen in Code One. So if you want to know and think about our thoughts about that, you can go check that podcast out. It's probably the previous podcast. And in our opinions, I think we were basically overall very happy with those changes, right? All the basic rules.
Yeah.
The N4 changes, basically, like you said, one of the things, the N4 is just a bigger rule set, right? And we said maybe it's still too big, but the ability to have two combat groups is a big difference, right? And the ability to so basically, those added rules. What do we think about those things on top? Do you feel like all of those added, like we said, generally the unnesting of all those rules were good, but technically a lot of that happened in Code One, right? So what about the changes that are added on top of Code One? And I think we all agreed, like if you listen to that podcast, we thought that Code One changes are great, but I think you did mention that you wanted a little bit of that extra complication or that extra new rules that you get from N4. Now,
Yeah,
those
like
extra rules, were they that you get in N4? How many of them were good? What do you think about those rules that you need on top of Code One to make the game, really shine?
so suppressive fire, I think, was one of the things we said was really missing.
Mm-hmm.
That suppressive fire is a huge piece of defensive tech, and that without that, it really changes the way Infinity plays.
Yeah.
Since you now have to switch to direct template weapons to defend yourself,
Mm-hmm.
rather than hoping to just get your one shot back and survive.
Mm-hmm.
So that basically puts back in a class of troops that might have been too weak in Code One.
Yeah.
Now they're much better to play, like things with mimetism and all that, and things to deploy further up the board. They're too vulnerable in Code One because you can't put your guys into.
Yeah, if you couldn't camo to defend yourself, you're in trouble in Code One.
Yes, but now you have two ways of. Well, now most troops have weapons with burst 3, which means they can go to suppressive fire, which means most troops can make use of that defensive tech.
Yeah.
Whereas in Code One, if you're not camo, you're probably dead meat if you're in the midfield.
Yeah, that's right. Or you're heavy because you take multiple shots.
You're not heavy and you're not camo. Don't go in the midfield unless you're going to kill a bunch of people and then just commit suicide.
Yeah, that's right. I totally agree. So I do think that those kind of changes are good and great, but they're technically, a lot of them were not really, like all these abilities we're talking about were directly translated from N3. They didn't really change that much, right? Suppressive fire, coordinated orders. What other things do we like?
Well, the suppressive thing I was going towards was that now using your command tokens at the start of the game, you can put one guy into suppressive. So I think that I would have hoped for two, because like the order subtractions two, and it would make sense to put two guys in Suppressive Fire, which also covers much more of the board.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to put one guy into Suppressive Fire is a nice way of defensive tech, because in a lot of missions,
Mm.
if you don't have the first player often has the ability to rampage so hard that you're
Mm-hmm.
not sure if you can win the mission if that's the goal of just causing damage
Yeah.
in like just killing missions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having the Suppressive Fire puts back in a nice balance on those more offensive missions, less
Yeah,
objective.
I feel like the one Suppressive Fire, like I think we talked about and we've tried out actually some just some fun rules at the end of N4 because I guess there are some things that bugged us N3 that there's some things that bugged us on N3 link teams and mostly link teams but one of the things that we tried out was as a tactical order to be able to put in people into Suppressive Fire in like exactly the rule that they had that they just gave us, except two guys, right? But the ways we did it was you can only put in Suppressive Fire guys that are in your deployment zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Suppressive Fire. Yeah, but the rule that Infinity went with is you can put anyone into Suppressive Fire, which
Mm-hmm.
I think what it does is it really helps infiltrating, like guys without camo that are infiltrators with a Suppressive Fire weapon. That's really what they're there for, right?
Yeah.
Which is good. Sorry?
Yeah, it can now be a huge roadblock up the board, whereas before you might just be trying to lay mines or something to slow people down.
Yeah, so I think it's really good. I think it's useful for a lot of units that before were, like you said, right? In Code 1, there's this class of units that have infiltration and no camo, which means you really don't want it. Without Suppressive Fire, you have no way to defend yourself without, you don't have your army next to you. So you're out in front, and you don't have enough defense to survive an opponent's attack, right? So any unit that didn't have camo that was an infiltrator was kind of hot garbage. Now with this unit, like in defense, right? On offense, it's fine. Like your first turn, then you're like, yeah, I'm going to put this infiltrator up there. I'm going to attack with them. It's great. But now with this rule, it allows those units to shine even on defense because now you can put the guy in Suppressive Fire. He's ready to defend. The only thing is, I agree that it'd be cooler if you added, I guess, another token where you could put, instead of one guy, two guys in Suppressive Fire in your deployment zone, right? Which when you do that, it makes it almost feel like the game is already started, right? Like the defender has everything laid out. They defended themselves. They're already starting to defend themselves, laying Suppressive Fire when the game starts.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, yeah, exactly. Oh well.
It's in a cool direction.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good direction in a way that we liked. I do feel like coordinated orders, they're directly ported, right? And there's that other rule from N3. I think that rule was great in N3. There's why change something that ain't broke, right?
Yeah, so obviously they intend to change the fire teams, and because they put the coordinated orders right in the main rules, that's more likely to stay as is.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they become more similar in the future.
Yeah, I think I actually do think you could kind of say like one of the good things is the whole not putting in link teams and all these other rules that are not necessarily like super polished in the main rule book. It's basically signaling to everyone that these are going to change. And in some ways it's like, I'm glad for what they didn't do, right? Because I remember in N3, right, when they released last edition, the problem with link team rules is their link team rules are literally like a N2 rule set, right? That they directly ported to N3. And I remember they initially did the same thing with N3, where they're like, oh, we're not putting in link teams yet, right? We're just porting over the old link team rules. And I was super excited to see how they were going to update link teams to match with the rest of their game that they had overhauled with N3. And it turns out they did not. So when Human Sphere came out, I was super disappointed with link teams. I'm like, this rule set, this link team rules that are come from a previous edition don't make sense with all the changes they had done into the new game. And so I was very, very disappointed when they made it canon, right? They didn't change the rules that much, and it was the exact same rule. It's just, I don't know, typed in N3 script. So in N4, in some ways I'm happy that they didn't just port it over, but I'm also worried and tentative because they did the same thing in N3 and they didn't fix the rules. So I'm worried there's going to, like you said, they're going to be worried about making things change too much in such a way that they were going to piss off a whole bunch of players. And in my opinion, link teams are one of those things that new players in general don't really like because they're complicated and they don't work like any of the rest of the game. So
No,
yeah,
they
so
changed
people,
the hero structure and everything else.
yeah, so it's just, I can see people's, in some ways, once they get into the game, link teams are strong and they make sectorials good. So like it's good for in that way. But when a new player is coming into the game, it's so hard for them to wrap around their head around link teams, both playing and playing against. Because playing, it has all of these rules and things you have to know that don't play like the rest of the game. Like literally a link team game is very different. I think we've talked about this before than a vanilla game, like a non-link team game. So you kind of have to learn two different ways, two systems. And already when we talked about how Infinity is so complicated, putting on the link teams on top is just this barrier that makes it really hard for players to get over. And they often just complain about, I don't understand link teams. How does this work? And you're like, well, just play vanilla, man. Like vanilla's strong. You don't have to use link teams. Link teams are entirely different way of playing the game. They're not intuitive. They don't make sense. They're extra weird. We talk about cheerleaders making other guys stronger. Like link teams literally is like if you put a whole bunch of guys in a link, then one guy becomes super strong because they're cheered on by the other people.
Yeah, it's a fluff thing that doesn't make any sense of how it's realistically working. And a lot of the game's trying to model reality, and this part of the game doesn't model reality in any way.
So yeah, so it's good. I guess we're now talked a lot about it. It's good that they didn't go all in on link teams, but I'm still. This is more like a neutral thing. I don't know if this is necessarily a good thing because, like I said, once burned, twice shy.
Yeah. Well, beyond just the rule set, with the new profiles and changes to the sectorial armies, which do get the fire teams, they've created a lot more fire team options, which effectively makes fire teams more powerful. And they were already really powerful. So hopefully any changes that get made in the future sort of tone that down a bit. But for the near term, I can really see fire teams being extremely important.
Yes, I agree. Especially
and even if they get toned down, just the fact that you can move around, literally they took out every single bonus, people would still take the fire teams just for the sake of being able to move things around the board in unison. So
yeah, I think we mentioned before, like we like coordinated basically does the same thing as fire teams, but you already have coordinated orders. It's in the game. I feel like it's a much more elegant solution. They should just move link teams more towards that. I think you mentioned this like literally earlier in this podcast. I think that hopefully is the direction they're taking, just to, again, make the game more clear, more consistent, make things, smaller. Just because you can add a special rule to make something different doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing for the game, right? Like we said, the game is way too big in general. Okay. So I do want to say, like, it sounds like we've been really down on N4, but a lot of these things are generally like structural things. And like I said, it's more about, we were hoping for bigger changes in those directions in N4 that have not really materialized. But again, depending on how they handle the property and how they continue to change things, it can still head in they're still heading in the right direction. It's just not as big of a change as we had hoped. So let's do a little bit more positive things. What are some really good things like we said, the base rule set that's in Code 1 is good, but what are some other good things that are specific to N4 that you got really excited about? Besides like specific models that you're like, oh, this is awesome now.
Oh, the hacking.
Structural
The
changes.
hacking is entirely better.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
before they were overlapping, like we just talked about there being overlapping units, or there were kind of overlapping hacking programs, like there'd be a couple programs that would isolate things, a couple programs that would immobilize things. Now there's one program to immobilize, one program to isolate, one program to kill other hackers, one program to take over tags. You're no longer just sifting through the rules, being like, okay, was this the one that had DA, an AP, and did it give you -3? Or just like, there's only one set of rules, and only one thing gives you bonuses or minuses.
Again, it's like false choices that they used to have, right? There was basically one good hacking thing, and then there's like a 5% chance that you would use another version. And you're like, this is not needed. It doesn't make the game more strategic. Again, this is just arcane knowledge that you're like, oh, technically, if I use this hacking program in this situation, I have a 5% better chance of winning. And you're like, this is not an interesting decision in general. And, some people like that, but I think overall, considering how complicated the game is, it's just not worth it. It was not worth it. And hacking is now like super clean now. There's only 11 programs, right? It still seems a lot, but like each one does something different and is interesting in the thing it does, right?
Yeah, I do like their changes so the hacking programs will put up isolated and immobilized, which before would just go away on their own. That made they're kind of useful to sort of slow down your opponent. But now they're severely dangerous because your opponent has to remove them.
Yeah, it's not just slowing down. It could literally shut someone down
for the rest of the game. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do really, really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see how it plays out. So it would seem that because heavies are vulnerable to those, to the two main isolating and immobilizing hacking programs.
Yep.
That heavies got cheaper, but now that vulnerability they have to the hacking is now much more dangerous to them. So it'll make it really interesting how the game plays out. And I think camo hackers are going to be a much more seen thing, because before camo hackers were quite expensive, but the prices on those, the point costs have gone down on those.
Yeah.
So people may be more. And the fact that your opponent doesn't see that they're there controlling this 16-inch bubble, that can shut down your big hit pieces that you want to cross the board with. Yeah. So now the heavies also got faster on a lot of profiles.
Yep.
So you're really going to want to across the board, which means that now to sort of for the arms race against that, you're going to want to take more hacking, and especially, like I said, camo form.
Yeah. I feel like this is one of those things where it had a bunch of other good things that happened to the game that I feel like it'll be a good change. And I think you kind of saw this again in Code 1. I guess the more I talk about this, the more I guess in Code 1. But this is obviously, all the Code 1 changes are in N4. So what they kind of did was one of the other really good things that they did was a lot of the top level units in Infinity. So heavy infantry or tags or big units, big, tough, strong units were basically they costed too many points for how good they were, right? So in general, in Infinity, you would rather take smaller, weaker units so that because you could have way more of them, and that directly translated to how much you could do because you have more orders, right? Now, basically what they did is all of these super expensive, not all of them, but a lot of these super big, heavy units, they reduced their price, which made heavy infantry much more competitive onto the game playing sphere, and which means that like a lot of the top units are now heavy infantry, right? Whereas before, a lot of the top units were light infantry just because of the way that the game worked and the fact that 2 wounds and armor was too expensive. Now, not only did armor get better because they kind of changed a couple of the rules with crits, they also reduced the prices across the board with these heavy infantry and sped up a lot of them so that they're faster now. And so I feel like in the new game, you're going to see a lot of like heavy infantry because the models are really good. And therefore, to counter the heavy infantry, you can either take heavy infantry or you could take these kind of like direct counters with hacking, which makes hacking more attractive. And then on top of that, I think you mentioned hacking is now cheaper as well.
Yep. So I think the hacking game is going to become better that
Mm.
way.
And like I said, I just want to emphasize, I love the fact that they reduced these super expensive units, because before everyone wanted to take their like super heavy infantry or their tags, which are basically like mini robots. I guess they're not really mini robots. They're big robots, but like not Gundam size. They're like I don't know, 2 men tall or 2 or 3 men tall, right? So they want to take these like stompy robots, but they were just too expensive in the old game. And now that they're competitively priced, I feel like you're going to see a lot more of them because they're actually good for their points cost, right? In fact, they're in some ways we're going to talk about probably some of them are too good for for their points cost. They really price them really aggressively, right? So I feel like this entire group of underutilized units is going to see a lot more play in it, which I think is great, especially considering how much people love those things. And like, I think when you see a whole bunch of infantry and one big stompy robot and someone comes by on your table and looks at the game, that's one of those centerpieces that really attracts people to play the game. Like we mentioned, one of the best things about Infinity is the models are amazing. So when you're able to
especially the heavy guys have an amazing look compared to some of the other power armor style guys in other games. They look blocky and they look like the armor shouldn't even work. And Infinity actually looks like futuristic armor that might work.
Yeah, so it just like it's very attractive. It gets people into the game, and now they're actually going to be good. So not only do you look and say, "Oh, that thing's awesome," and you come by and say, "Oh, what's that?" Someone might say, "Oh, yeah, this is my model. It's so awesome. He's a big stompy robot." And before in the old game, they would always add the caveat, "Yeah, but he kind of sucks at this game. I'm just playing it because he looks cool." Now they're like, "Oh yeah, and he's so good. He can do all of this kind of things, and it can just really." When your players are really excited about their actual units that they bring, it can help infect people who come and look, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when they're the ones also, when they look at those models and like, oh, I also think this salamander or this Guaigia is like super strong, right? Or not super strong, super cool looking. And then I look in the game and I talk about it and I say, well, what do you think about the salamander? And they're like, yeah, it's such a good unit and it looks so awesome, right? That kind of like helps people get hyped up about the game. So I really like that portion.
Yes. Yeah, the way I was trying to play the game before, and a lot of people played the game before, involved a lot of just like garbage troops, which now because of that limit of 15 models,
Mm-hmm.
I think is going to go.
Let's set up 15 models. So I know I pushed it off a little bit, but like let's go in and explain the 15 model thing in general.
Okay, so in order to accomplish things in Infinity, like for most missions, I was finding that I would want a minimum of 13 orders in my list. Because after you take some casualties, by the end of the game, you still want enough orders on the board to be able to change the board and get things done.
Yeah.
And like the game is still, I'm expecting to have the same sort of missions. So I would probably keep that same rule of thumb of wanting to aim for 13 regular orders, which now with the cap of 15.
So wait, the cap though is not an official cap either. This is kind of a link team thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The 15 order cap is only for tournament play.
They said it was the basic way of playing it, and anything else was a special rule to change it.
Nope, the other way around.
No.
So,
okay. But then again, most people are going to play.
So the big thing is if you play ITS, which so if you think about it, so the thing with Infinity is it's a very competitive game, kind of. It's the game is so Corvus Belli releases a tournament pack. And a tournament pack has like 20 different missions that are all quite themey, right? And this is generally how people play because there's so much theme and there's the gameplay of the tournament pack. Even if you're not playing a tournament, like the games are fun, interesting, varied. They all have different objectives and things like this, right?
Yeah, because currently the base N4 rules have 4 missions, which they're good missions, but you probably want to move beyond them to get more variety. So then you move on to playing the ITS.
Yeah, which is 20 missions. Now, the base of the 20 missions, so in the normal gameplay, there's an unlimited number of guys, right? But for ITS, which is the main way people play, even casually, you could think about it as it's just an expanded mission pack, right? That, if you're playing the ITS system, that's the one that they said the default is 15 guys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a soft cap because it's not part of the quote unquote official base rule set, but it's like the unofficial official mission set, right? That limits it down to 15 orders. So like link teams, where it's like, oh, we have a packet that could change, right? In the future. In some ways, it's the same way because this ITS mission set is their current, they basically every season, they're saying, these are the missions that you should play, right? And they're fun, they're different. A lot of the times, the missions are just like themed based on something. Like there's a previous mission season that was based all around using tags, right? And the missions would have like, oh, here, take some free tags. So it's very story-based and themey, even though it's quote-unquote tournament for tournaments, which really helps, get all people to play it. And in that one, the basics is 15. So unofficially, officially, the new cap is 15, even though if you only bought the rule book, you would not see anything that says that 15 is the limit.
Yep. And this document hasn't even come out yet. So
yes, that's right. That's right. So
we're told what it's going to be, so we kind of are inclined to play towards that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I'm pretty sure that they balanced it. The game, they're balancing the game based on 15 orders.
Yes, because a lot of the irregular order things became much cheaper, and the impetuous things became much cheaper.
Yeah.
Well, it's just the irregular. Not all the irregular things, but the irregular impetuous ones became cheaper.
A lot of irregular, yes. So there's a lot of stuff that was decent or good that was irregular, all right, like good or cheap before, got even cheaper.
Yeah, oddly, it was the irregular impetuous, which had both, that got cheaper.
No, not just that.
Really?
There's a bunch of other stuff. Basically, there's a bunch of stuff that was cheap that got even cheaper, and if you were or cheap stuff that was already good got even better. And you're like, okay, so if I were playing the old system where I don't have where I don't have to run 15 orders, or I can run as many orders as I want, with this cheapness, I could even run over 20 comfortably.
Yeah, because most things across the board got cheaper.
Yes, exactly. So now I can take my super strong heavy or
the heavies became relatively more cheaper than like the lighter things. It became a little cheaper, but the heavy things.
Which one? We'll talk about that later. But
the percent decreases of point cost, there were bigger percent decreases on heavy stuff than the percent decreases on little stuff.
Let's talk about this later because when we talk about points. But sorry, but the general idea is true, right? In general, the heavies got cheaper. So now you can fit, like if you didn't have a 15 order cap, you would be able to fit in a couple of heavies or a couple strong units and then a ton of cheaper units because the cheaper units also got cheaper.
Yeah.
So you could flood the board with over 20. I think I could easily make a list in the new one that's over 20 and it would crush a unit that a list that only brought 10 units. Because you have 10 units, you have whatever, 12 orders, 13 orders, even if you have like these special new rules that allow you to have an extra order. And all you would do is kill my irregulars. And then on my turn, I would have 10 orders with a superpowered heavy, which the heavies got stronger. So I have my 1 or 2 heavies, then I can go and like kill every single time I kill one of your units. It's an important unit for you.
Mm-hmm. But now with the tournament 15 cap, when I'm figuring I want to start at 13, there's now 2 slots that I could see maybe being used for irregulars, and then maybe I actually want orders. So it's the space to fit those units in is now in question. So
yeah, I really like so that's the thing. Like I did say like.
But
it's much easier to break the system with like 20 orders. But now if you adhere to the 15 order, what do they call it? Not limited insertion, whatever, limited, some sort of tactical window or something like that.
Yeah.
Which to be fair, it makes sense because you're like, okay, so I'm supposed to be like, Infinity is about covert ops teams fighting each other, right? My covert
Yeah.
ops team is like a fucking protest, like 30 people showing up.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be 30 people with like rocket launchers show up. And it's like, this is not covert anymore. You now have a
Exactly.
wall of rockets.
So I do like the change. I do like fluff wise, it's good. I do. What do you think about it being 16? I mentioned before I like the idea of 16 as opposed to 15. 16 is just a nicer number. Um,
Yeah, that would have left those potential like 3 slots
mhm.
is now much more to play with because now like those two is not very much of an ability to vary your army. Once you've got 3, like that's a nicer number to vary. Once you hit 4, you're like, okay, now I just have a whole lot. Now you have
Yeah,
lots of units on the board. If you're going all the way up to
yeah. I would say 17
17,
seems too much.
yeah,
16, in my opinion, seems right. 15 is okay. But in some ways, it might be better. 15, because what it does is it because it makes you feel pressure. Like 16 feels like I can basically build most of the list that I would want to build.
yeah,
15 makes me feel like I'm sacrificing.
yeah. If you decide you really want those 4 cheap impetuous guys,
Mm-hmm.
you're now playing a very very limited list, and you better have like a really efficient way of accomplishing the mission with the rest of your army. Like those
Yeah,
little
those
guys,
those 10 guys better be tough.
yeah, the cheap guys might get lots of kills for their points. They might make up their points value, but the rest of your guys better be able to like, hey, yeah, as you said, not die because now you're going to
Mm-hmm.
be really low on orders, or they better be really well tailored to the mission for
Mm-hmm.
whatever it happens to be of just like moving points into the zone or doing objectives with camo infiltrators. So you just don't need the orders to get there.
Yeah, so in some ways, even though I feel like 16, I could basically build what I wanted, I do like the idea that 15 forces you into hard decisions,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, do I really want to take this? And technically, 15 regular orders is a lot of orders,
Yeah.
right?
So before I guess since there's less restrictions, you could build all comers lists.
Yeah.
It kind of did a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I
Mm-hmm.
think with this like tighter restriction, you're gonna have to tailor your list more to every mission, because otherwise you might be left hanging. If it's a mission that requires doing a lot of objectives, like before, there are some that had 9 objectives on the board.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna want to maybe go all the way for 15 regular orders in a mission like that.
Yeah,
To
that's
be able
true.
to, there's so much to do on the board.
Technically,
So
your all comers list was just 15 regular orders already, but also
it was.
three regular, or maybe 14 regular and 4 irregular kind of thing.
Yep.
So, you know what? I would say, thinking about it, even though 16, I could basically bring whatever I wanted. Well, like the 16, I could build the lists that I already wanted to bring. I think maybe 15 is better because of that, right? Because it makes it difficult for me to bring everything that I want to. Now it's like, oh, I gotta make this decision. How am I gonna do this so that I can, make it work, right?
Yeah, because before I had like 3 army lists I just kept using over and over,
Uh-huh.
because one of those 3 would probably take care of the mission.
Yeah.
But now that's not going to be so possible. That's not
Yeah,
going to be
so
productive.
so so funnily enough, like one of the best changes I think we're saying to the game and most impactful is not even an official N4 change. It's just like, I guess you would say it's a new ITS season change that is going to have, I think, reverberate through the entire game, and I think it's one of the best changes that they've done.
Yep.
Even though it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because I can't bring my 16 order lists anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's probably a good thing, and it's makes the games quicker, which is never a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree. Like 20 order lists, like some people said, it's not just bad for the person that's running 20. Like even if you're fast at 20, it makes it hard for the opponent to know how to play because there's just so many units on the table, right? So you don't know, like we said before, the player who's fighting the 20 order list doesn't know if they should just push past your like cheap orders or to get to the meaty stuff, right? It causes some analysis paralysis, right? So I do like, 15 orders now maximum. It's great. Love it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we've been going for a while. Do you want to talk about units now, about things we love and don't love?
Um,
Or are there more core things we want to?
let's go. I guess I think we talked mostly about that. Let's go maybe some general good, bad, and odd things. Let about like we talked generally, just one last go around about what's good, bad, and odd. So for me, I think just finishing it up, I'm going to leave good for last. So, just
Mhm.
land on a good note. So I'm going to do odd, bad, and good. So one odd thing that I found is, and this is actually in code one, but it doesn't show up as much, is there's some weird zone of control things, AROs that are happening in N4. And I think this is like kind of like a missed opportunity to really clean this up when you have a new edition. There's some really gray areas because you're not supposed to measure your zone of control, but it causes an ARO. So basically what ends up happening in the game is it's just hard to know whether a person can do something, right? So in the game, you're supposed to move and then you cause arrows, and then the opponent, because they have an arrow, they can do an action. But the way that the game is working right now, there are certain situations where you have like you can either trigger an arrow from a line of sight, seeing line of sight, or zone of control. And right now in the game set, there are certain arrows that you get from measuring zone of control, but you don't measure zone of control uh, until the very end of the order. So you'd actually don't, it's unclear how you're supposed to know if you actually have an arrow or not. And the way the game is set up is that if you don't have an arrow, then they can perform another action. Like then they perform another action. And then if you get an arrow, then you can react. But the problem is in the second step, it's very unclear about whether like there are times, because you're not measuring explicitly, there are times when you don't know if you actually get an arrow or not.
Yeah, like if something moves to the edge of your zone of control,
Mm-hmm.
and then you figure they're not in, then they take their second action as a move,
Mm-hmm.
and they leave. You've now made no measurements while they've been close to you, and now
Mm-hmm.
the model's been moved away,
Yeah.
and there's no way to go back in time and make the measurement. Well,
About were they in zone of control? Should I have had an action?
yep.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
then so like let's say you did make the action
And then
and
they
they
moved
moved
away.
away. How do you measure that they were in your zone of control at that time?
Yep, because the step where you make your measurements
Yeah.
to find if the arrows are valid doesn't come until later.
So yeah, and I think they made a big good change where you're allowed to measure your moves. I guess is a good thing. Is you're able to measure your move now when you're moving. So you don't have this like I move roughly here and then you measure it out. You say I'm moving this way, and then you measure it out, and then you can kind of change it to make sure it makes sense. But they should have taken like this is again one of those things where it's like they should have just taken the extra step and say, and then once you're done your movement, measure zone of control, right? So now it's very clear who has arrows and who has not, because you just measured who has arrows and who has not, who doesn't.
They could just say you can measure anything in your zone of control, and that would fix the whole movement thing. That would fix the whole zone of
Yep.
control. You just say you can measure any time in your zone of control. Would have
Yep.
fixed those weird
Yep.
issues. Anyway,
But they did not. So now you have this weird, like you said, like weird things where you're like, did I have zone of control or not? And now you moved your unit, I don't know. So that's kind of odd. And I wish they had solved that. And I feel like if this becomes, it is kind of, the thing is, it does come up and it does cause arguments, but it doesn't come up all the time because in general, zone of control is only 8 inches and this is a shooting game. So oftentimes you're not that close. At the same time, the game is changing. So if it ends up happening a lot, just like they might change it. They might have to change it, forced to solve the rule, because there was a previous rule that everyone who plays Infinity remembers. There's a rule where you could shoot a guy from the top of the head and they would not be able to react. And they literally made a ruling. So it was unsure. People were unsure about whether they could react or not if you shoot a guy on the top of the head. They made a ruling that said you couldn't shoot back from if you got shot at the top of the head, which is degenerate gameplay. So everyone was like, well, no one actually played that way because everyone was like, no, that ruins the game. So very few people would actually use the rule because it was just breaking. This is like literally an example of the game players of Infinity having more sense than the actual people that made the decision about the thing, or thought it through more, right?
They thought of all the geometrical implications,
Yeah.
not just the intention of the rules.
Yeah. And so then they had to, like, once people started doing it, and I guess some people were like, no, this is stupid. They kind of pushed it. They had to backtrack. And literally in N4, they changed the rules to explicitly state you can't shoot. If you shoot a guy on the top of the head, they can shoot back.
Yeah, so if you shoot them in their butt, they can shoot you back too, as long as you're still, and you might not see them, but as long as part of them is still in front of you, you can shoot them. No, they're only seeing your ass.
Yeah, so like it totally solved. Like they had to solve that kind of issue just because of the geometry. And I feel like in this one, they're gonna have. I don't know if it'll be as big of a deal, but because
it's a less common situation, basically.
It's a less common situation, and it's not as abusable, right? It's just annoying, and it doesn't make sense. It causes arguments, right? But it is. So they might, like, literally shooting guys on the top of the head. You can, like, literally win tournaments just doing that. But in this one, it's harder to abuse. It's just annoying whenever it comes up. So they might not actually solve this one, but I do feel like it's similar. And the annoying thing is that, like, rules as written, you can actually solve a lot of these issues. But just the way that they kind of chose to interpret it or what it actually means makes it really confusing.
Yeah. So that was a good and the bad. I guess you named the odd, the good and the bad, didn't you?
The good is, I said measuring moving, and I also wanted to mention close combat changes. In general, close combat looks much more enticing than it used to be. A lot of the skills that were there before are now much better. Like Berserk is better, martial arts is more clear to understand and better, and movement, like we said before, movement is much more faster, and close combat's cheaper. So
the fact that you can actually measure to make sure you'll get to your final destination, you now don't have to worry so much about, if I leave cover and skip my shooting to get into base-to-base contact, will I actually make it there?
Yeah.
Now you know you will make it there, and if you measure and you're like, no, I don't make it there, then you just don't make the move and you keep on shooting.
Yeah. So, like, there's so many things that really help close combat.
Yeah, I mean, it increases the speeds on those heavy things for them to go fight in combat. And I guess they bumped up the best close combat things. Their close combat values got bumped up a bit.
So the very best close combat guys, they didn't really bump up. In some ways, they nerfed them, like the top level. But the media, like the second to top level, they buffed all of those guys. So there were a bunch of guys that were marginal before, where they were not quite good enough to be good at close combat, and that was a huge swath of guys. And now those guys are all good at close combat. So, yeah. So I think it's going to emphasize using close combat a lot more. So, yep.
That could be cool.
Yeah, and it's always fun to be like a space guy with a space sword, slashing a guy with a gun.
It is.
All right. How about you?
So I'm going to start with the good because you named two good, so I'm just going to take back one of them.
Okay.
Trying to move before you make it. Because that makes everything so much clearer.
Yeah.
That trying to describe what you're going to do and then doing it isn't always so productive. And for people who aren't as good at measuring, like I've gotten good at it, but a lot of other players will get really confused over what they can accomplish and what they can't accomplish. So just letting them pre-measure what they can do rather than just starting to slide their guy around the table and then them doing something they really shouldn't have been doing because it ruins, it just gets their guy killed since they weren't noticing something, is the pre-measuring lets you just avoid that. So I'd say that's good. The bad is that maybe this will get fixed with play testing, but from going through the unit profiles, like looking at the point costs of things, it looks like every ability just has a value in and of itself. Like, well, if it's a heavy, it probably costs 1 point value to give it an HMG. If it's a light, it costs a point value to give it an HMG. But then when you start pairing certain abilities together, like having MSV2 and an HMG, it doesn't look like they account for the fact that those two things combined synergize to make a unit way more powerful. That if you say had an MSV2 SM, like pistol or a flamethrower, yeah, who really cares? But once you start getting good weapons combined with being able to see through smoke, that combination is incredibly powerful. And the profiles that have that, you're clearly going to take that version of the profile over like your basic weapons.
Okay.
Like if you have an MSV2 combi rifle and then on a light,
Uh-huh.
and then you had a light with no MSV and a combi rifle, if it costs like say 7 points to bump both of them up to an HMG, you're gonna
Yeah.
be like, oh, I'm bumping the MSV2 one up because the
Yeah.
combination of two things is killer. And they doesn't look like they've accounted for that like synergistic value, which maybe
Yeah.
when more
Yeah.
playtesting, they see like what lists people are building, they'll see that people only take those certain profiles that work, that have skills that work well together.
Yeah. I do feel that there was a couple of things that were like surprising me. I think so they did a lot of, in terms of points, they did a lot of good changes in terms of the pricing of close combat and armor, which was way overpriced before, and they kind of reduced that. But I still think they instead of, it was a lot about reducing costs that were overpriced as opposed to increasing costs that were underpriced. So I feel like mimetism is still underpriced.
Yeah.
BS is still slightly underpriced, and infiltrating camo is still underpriced. And like you said, infiltrating camo is the combo, right? Infiltrating by itself is not as good. Camo by itself is not as good. Infiltrating camo is really strong, right?
Yep.
So I feel like that combo, it looks like when you look at the units that kind of stayed the same and the units that changed, units with infiltrating camo didn't go down. So basically what it seems like is in the new rules, like you said, because it's not based on synergies or any of these kind of things, units that did not have infiltrating camo, which is still good, right? Still underpriced and mimetism, and did also not get the things that changed better, which is armor and wounds and close combat, are still overpriced because they don't have any of the things that are really good now, right? If you have high phys for some reason, I think physical is still overpriced, right?
Yep.
So it's weird. Yeah.
Well, now that medikits can be shot.
Sorry?
Now that medikits can be shot and not get the -3, maybe physical's value is up. We just haven't seen it play out.
Yeah, but not as like physical, not as much as the way that they cost it, I don't think.
We'll see.
One thing I do want to mention, I want to throw in another bad. This is just one ability. I should say Lynx because Lynx is, but whatever. Everybody mentioned that. Frenzy is something that really bugged me in the old game that they kept. So they kind of saw that it was really annoying because Frenzy is a rule. Basically, if you kill a guy, on the old rule was if you kill a guy at the start of your next turn, they gain Frenzy, which means that you can't, they don't get cover and they automatically, they become impetuous, right? They gain a rule, basically. That's both good and bad. They changed it, so they knew that people would always forget to Frenzy because it literally takes, like you kill a guy and then it literally takes an entire, like if you kill a guy in your turn, literally takes an entire full round, yeah.
It could be half an hour later before you've got to put the token down.
Exactly, it's really hard to remember, right? So they're like, oh, that's too long, so let's change it. So now, what do you think the rule is? The obvious one is like as soon as you kill a guy, you do the trigger, you get Frenzy. No, now it's at the end of the turn that they killed a guy, then they gain Frenzy. I'm like, that's the right direction. But again, this is one of those things. Just take it a little bit farther. It's so much easier and also more impactful and more fluffy, and it makes more sense if as soon as you kill a guy, then you gain your Frenzy ability, like this impetuous ability, which is now like both good and bad, right?
Yeah, fluff. It's one of those things that fluff-wise, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, fluff-wise, it doesn't make sense. Complication-wise, it doesn't make sense. Memory-wise, just gameplay-wise, it doesn't make sense. And it's better than it used to be, but they literally just needed to take it that one extra step, and I would be like, mwah, it'd be great. But they did not, which really annoyed me. Sorry.
So back to my final odd.
Yeah.
My final odd.
Did I take your bad?
No, I already mentioned my bad. My bad was the lack of was
Oh
about the
yeah,
point
yeah,
on things. It wasn't about the rules. It was about how things are point costed.
yeah,
Because we've now seen that.
yeah. That's right.
My odd is about how you get cover on roofs, which stems from how the cover rule now works. Because
Mm-hmm.
now cover doesn't require 1/3 of the silhouette to be
Mm-hmm.
obscured, which is good and bad in some ways. Because now just like garbage on the ground can give you cover. But we'll see
Mm.
how like communities decide to play that. If you just
I
do
think
it,
it's basically going to be like people will
just
just classify. So I mentioned on this, like just when it on Facebook, that I was like, oh, they're probably just like classified so that certain size of terrain doesn't give cover to certain units,
yeah.
certain size of units, because it's like ridiculous if a box gives cover to a mag group of guard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that seems to me like clear, right? So like, but one of the guys mentioned, and it's maybe more simple, is like literally uh, certain terrain. We're just going to be like, this is just cosmetic,
Yeah.
right? And like, it doesn't actually give you cover. Like if it's a fire hydrant, just nobody gains cover from the fire hydrant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I like that as much, but again, I feel like people are just going to resolve it. Like this is a small rule that is like technically it's like gray. It's a gray area, I feel like, where people, because there's a lot of classification you do on the table about saying what this is, what this does, what this kind of thing does, right? In terms of saturation zones, in terms of cover, in terms of zero visibility or low visibility, right? There's a lot of gray zones where you just nominate things to have that. And I don't think it's a big step to say this piece of terrain only gives cover to this up to this size of unit.
Like S2 and smaller, because those are
Exactly.
common things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a sensible way of doing it. And it's just like a trade on the terrain rather than having a whole chart.
Yeah.
So the odd part of that is that in the game before, the roof would need to have like a wall at the front of it to give you cover, and you have to go touch the wall.
Yep.
But now, if say you're shooting at something below you and you're standing on the middle of the roof, you are technically in contact with the terrain, and they cannot see your whole silhouette
because a little bit is blocked from your base
because of that piece of terrain. So now you can stand in the middle of the roof, just shooting down on people, and you've got perfectly good cover. I mean, if you have roof-to-roof combat, now you of course want that wall at the edge to protect you.
Yeah. If they can see over the lip of the roof, yeah.
Yeah, if they can look from their head down and see the floor of the roof you're standing on, you don't get cover. And now you can kind of hang out in the middle of the roof and shoot people on the ground.
I feel like that makes more sense, honestly. I have the high ground.
There you go.
Classic. It's a trope. It has to happen. And apparently people in the future love memes. So, yeah, I love it. So there's good and bad, I guess, or weird, I guess. It's not even bad. It's like there's good and there's kind of weird that I think people will just easily solve just from house ruling stuff.
Yeah, I think people will just get used to it. It just feels odd from how the game played before that you felt like when you stood up and walked towards, you got used to standing up and you walked towards the wall, and during that time you didn't have any cover, and then when you fought in the future you had the cover. But now it'll feel weird to existing players, but I think for new players they won't think anything of it.
Yeah, it'll be really easy to understand, so it's good. Can I mention one more thing that kind of annoys me?
In the bad category? You did too good. So.
Now this will be 3 bad. I guess I'll have to mention another good thing. I'll gush more about something else when we talked about units. One thing that annoys me is they did change a rule that bugs the crap out of me. And this technically happened in Code 1 too, which kind of annoys me. I guess I should have mentioned in that podcast, but I was too busy talking about how Code 1 is great. If you're unconscious and you get healed, you automatically stand up. So basically when you're unconscious, you drop prone on the ground, right? Just like if a guy got shot, they would fall on the ground prone. Now, if a doctor comes in and patches your wound and you get healed up, you immediately leap up like Superman and say...
He immediately lifts you up in the air to get... Right, you shot again.
Yeah, he's like, "You're good, right?" And then the person will be like, "Yeah, prove it. Stand up." And so they have to stand up at that point. And you're like, "This doesn't make any sense fluff wise, right?
Yep.
It doesn't make
Well,
sense."
so I
Yeah.
think one thing you'll like about it is that if you currently dislike link teams being too powerful right now, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of how that really benefits is that when you get someone killed in your link team and you're trying to build it back up to full strength, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
heal members, but you don't necessarily want some of those members to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
But now when people start trying to bring back their link teams, they're going to start exposing more people if they're all like hanging out on roofs.
Mm-hmm.
Killed like 2 of them, and they want to bring back 2, but they only want to fight with 1.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're going to get to be able to arrow against the 2 standing ones as opposed to just the 1 standing one they want to fight you with. So it kind of
That
works again.
sounds like you propped up your house using like, I don't know, like tin cans, and now
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, to make it work, I'm going to like duct tape the tin can stronger. It's like a
Yeah.
stupid fix to something that should never have happened at the beginning. Link teams are the problem,
Well,
not so you don't.
I don't think they intended this at all. It's just an implication.
Duct tape is not the right analogy. It would be like, I don't know, using string to tie the tin cans together, which is all stupid. Something like that. In any case,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is a maybe stabbing your house with knives into the tin cans.
Mm-hmm.
That's a better analogy to make them stay, because both of those things are stupid by themselves. And I guess if you do both, it's slightly better. But uh, the better solution was not to build to prop your house up with tin cans.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so this it just doesn't make any sense, and it's an added rule, so it's more complicated. In my opinion, it's possible the reason why they did that is some weird link team fix, but in my opinion, the reason why they did that is literally because people forget to when you put an unconscious. So when someone goes unconscious, generally you put an unconscious token next to them, and then when you heal them, people forget to replace it with a prone token. And I feel like that's the reason they stand up immediately.
Yeah, well, that's why maybe token's double-sided. But anyways,
Yeah, it's so stupid. Like there's so many other solutions. One solution is you don't have to. You can make them stand up immediately. That's a good
yeah,
rule that makes sense.
and if you forgot and you pulled you pulled the unconscious token off and you didn't put the prone down,
Yeah.
you did that.
Yeah,
You,
exactly. And now you'll definitely remember because you're like, oh, I could have done that.
I just got the guy killed.
Yeah.
Because it came
Or
back when I turned 20 minutes later and that guy was standing.
exactly. Or you could just have double-sided tokens where one side is unconscious and the other side is prone, and then when that happens, you literally flip them over,
Yeah, because
which is what you have.
apparently printing on 2 sides of paper is also possible too.
Oh yeah, imagine that. Well, to be fair, I use
I don't know.
translucent
Have you ever
acrylic
seen,
tokens, so I can't do that.
I don't know,
But
but have you ever seen board game tokens with 2-sided printing? I don't know. Board games have those
no,
things?
that's some weird future tech. It would
Yeah,
be nice if we got that in the future, but
it
as it
would
is
be.
right now, you just got to live with what you get. You have to use cut acrylic.
Mm-hmm.
Cut acrylic tokens is the only way, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the past.
Yeah. Okay. So that's my last thing about bad. Now, I guess to wrap it up, um, let's talk about specific units.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I guess one of the big changes, or one of the things that everyone got excited about, is like the changes to the units, because everybody got points like changes because they have a new points formula, and everyone also got new abilities and new things and new tweaks. So, well, not everyone, but almost everyone. So I guess now to wrap things up and kind of have that like fun, whatever kind of discussion is, what are your 3 uh, least favorite and 3 most favorite new or changed units?
So I honestly only mostly care about my factions.
That's fair.
That's
That's fair.
what it comes
All
down
right,
to.
go for it. Least favorite. 3 least favorite.
So I play hack, but I mostly only play sectorial, so I just get envious of things I can't take.
Fair enough.
And what I like the least, because it was too powerful before, is the Mukhtar. It's just
Mm-hmm.
one of those things that suffers from that its synergistic abilities are just over the top
Yeah.
because it has high move, it has MSV too. And it has a high volume, medium long range weapon.
And it has mimetism and high BS, but it has
Mimetism.
low armor, but that doesn't matter because it has so many tweaks that allows you to win all of your combats. So you don't have to care as much about losing armor, but it also has, for some reason, 2 wounds.
Yeah. And it didn't go up in points. It went down in points. And so it just
Very slightly. Went down 1 point.
Yeah. But it just makes a lot of other things irrelevant. And it's just some clearly broken thing.
Yeah, so it's basically so obviously too good.
Yep.
I could see that, definitely. Wah, wah, Mukhtar, boo! Also, why are you healing the ground?
That too.
All right. So do you want me to go? Do you want to do all 3 and then I'll do all 3?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I also play combined in mostly Onyx,
Uh-huh.
and the Umbras of all forms were very underwhelming.
Uh-huh.
And I now still find them underwhelming because their points are like in the high 30s, low 40s.
They did get buffed.
They did, but they still just fall over in a stiff breeze. Like one of them has mimetism, like the Mukhtar, and you're like, oh, this should be good because it's more points than a Mukhtar. And you're like, no, it's just gonna fall over.
It's actually, yeah, I guess is it slightly worse than the Mukhtar?
A lot worse.
Okay.
Because it's also fast.
But it's really good at close combat. That's what you're paying the points for.
Whoa. Yeah, okay. Tell me.
But it's much worse at shooting. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to kill everyone in 24 inches of me, or do I want to kill the guy who I've had to walk across the whole board to get? Because he is very similar, like I said.
Yeah,
he's like the Mukhtar. He's got mimetism like the Mukhtar. He's low armor. But
I'm pretty sure he has worse BS and no MSV2.
Yep. There you go. And that's what he has the Spitfire, but just missing the MSV2.
Oh, also he's not a survivable because he doesn't have shock immunity.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, he has no wounding cap, but he may just die from shock because he doesn't have that.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
So but to be fair, he only looks bad compared to a unit that is ridiculously overpowered.
Well, he also looks bad compared to everything else in the faction. So even if we don't go over to a different faction, he still looks bad.
Okay, so he's not quite there, basically.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, here's a question. If he gained shock immunity, because here's another issue, is like a lot of these units that used to look good with NWI don't look as good anymore because shock is so common now. Yeah. And it'll be more common because you're going to see a lot more people with multi-rifles because people are going to be taking more heavies. So the question is, if they gave the Umbra legates, I don't know. If they gave them shock immunity, would you consider it?
No, because it still doesn't kill things. For those points, I demand kills. I don't demand living. I demand kills.
Okay.
I want to win.
So in my opinion, if you gave the Umbra legates shock immunity, I would consider them. They're maybe still not good enough, which is a huge. That's fair. That's a huge negative. Now, and to be fair, I don't even with that, I don't think that. Oh, actually, Umbra legates got worse at close combat. Huh.
Yeah, there you go. All right, on to the third. I'll go to my third faction to make a pick.
Okay.
It's Druze. Security Chief Arsland, who I was hoping would get better. I painted him hoping that. Not really.
But he looks so cool.
He fits in that same category of like things with like mid-30s with no wounding cap. But like.
But he just in a Mukhtar?
He's not a
But he just isn't. The problem is you keep on comparing him to all these guys to a broken unit, man.
Well, it might be that he has MSV1, which just pushes up his points. So that might be why.
What? That's not MSV2. Yeah, how is this guy 1 point only 1 point less than a Mukhtar? I think this kind of proves just that Mukhtars are ridiculous.
Mukhtar make everything look like garbage. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's just got that level below He's got MSV1, not MSV2, and then veterans are also worth a lot of points, but you hope to never have to use your veteran. So there's just lots of things that add points, but aren't that great, as we said. So,
all right.
So that's one from each of the factions I play that let me down.
All right, I'm gonna go now. All right, so my 3 least favorite profiles. So I'm gonna go in order of the ones that bug me the most to the least. Okay, of the top 3, right? So all of these bug me a lot. So the one, number 3, so this is the one that bugs me the least out of the 3, is Morat Vanguards. Morat Vanguards still suck. And they sucked before, and they suck now. And I don't understand how so many of the cheap units got even cheaper. And Morat Vanguard are right now 14 points, and they're worse than a Fusilier, which is 10 points.
Well, let's go back to Security Arsland. He's got veteran, and you know what veteran's worth? Veteran's worth like 10 points or something.
It's ridiculous. How is a Morat Vanguard 14 points? It's physical, and they have veteran, right? Because religious is very cheap. So it's like they have 2 more physical than a Fusilier, and they have veteran, but they lose 1 BS, right? And technically they gain one willpower. But like BS is the most important stat. It's a shooting game. How is it 4 points more? That's like 40% more expensive than a Fusilier who is better at the main point of the game, right? Which is give an order and be good at shooting. Literally, and like good at defense, right? Because they have higher BS. Literally, this Vanguard is terrible. So number 1, like disappointing thing, and I was so looking forward to Vanguard being slightly better and usable, and I don't understand how the points formula still says this guy's worth 14 points. He's obviously not, right? So yeah, he's terrible. I think it's and it's just an example, honestly, of all Morats who are just too expensive. It's like their main things are veteran and high fizz, which are still happen to be apparently 2 of the most overpriced stats or 2 most overpriced things in the new version, which I assume didn't actually change because he's still 14 points, right? So that really, really bugged me. And to be fair, on as a side, I'm going to slide in a side thing. Fusiliers being 10 points. How is that still possible? Really? Fusiliers BS 12 for like 10 points? How are they still cheaper than Vanguard, than Zanshi, than like every other guy, right? When, like I said, 2 best things. Create an order, good at defense because they shoot better. I don't know how it works. That's my number 3. My number 2 is, I think we mentioned this, how like martial arts and stealth have been decoupled. And I mentioned that obviously someone who's a knight is not going to have stealth because why would you train and tiptoeing around? And I looked at the rules, and half of the knights still have stealth. Why did you explain? Joan of Arc has stealth. What? She's just like a heavy knight.
If it was only her mobility armor that had it, I'd be like, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, sure.
Her bulky armor, no.
Yeah, and Hospitallers have stealth. Like all of these knights where you're like, why did they like they're knights. Nobody thinks of knights as stealthy. And why did you give them stealth? It's literally, in my opinion, a gameplay thing where they're like, obviously you have stealth so you don't get hooked. And I'm like, this is not fluffy or whatever. It doesn't make sense. They're good. They're good otherwise. Why you don't have to push this thing just to make your units better. And it's more annoying when you see a lot of like, I don't know, ninjas or Japanese ninjas not having stealth. And then some of these knights have stealth. It's so unfluffy. It really, really annoys me. Even more than gameplay. Like technically, Vanguard is a bigger deal in terms of anyone that plays Morats and in terms of gameplay of someone who plays Morats. But just the annoyance of Space Knights being stealthy just pisses me off. I'm like, come on, man. Do better. The last thing, number 1. Can you guess what my number 1 annoying least favorite thing is?
No, probably not.
Mukhtar.
Oh, yeah, okay. You agree on that. It destroys
so
the value of everything else.
Stupid. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
so dumb. And I when I looked at it, I was like, oh, this is just because of the points formula and points for or of like when it came out in N3, I was like, oh, this is just too strong because of the points formula and things that are happening in N3, and they want to push units. But literally, it went slightly cheaper, like you said, in N4. And when I thought should have been the opposite, it should have gone up at least like I don't know 10% or something like that. If it went up 10%, it would still be a good unit. People would still take it. So it's just ridiculous. Um, and it just kind of shows, I don't know, just it shows that I'm very upset about these units, I guess. Yeah, and I wish that they'd fixed their points formula better, but they did not. At least in our opinion.
Yeah.
And to be
All right.
fair, Mukhtar is not the only superpowered unit. Like there's a bunch of units that have been changed to be aggressively like just in the same power range as Mukhtar, to be fair. But the fact that I was expecting this change to make it be less powerful, and the fact that they nerfed actually a lot of things that were in Mukhtar power level before, like posthumans and mutts, right? Those things were in the top level power level, and they've come down. The fact that they didn't do it with Mukhtar, and when I expected them to do it, it just like it really annoyed me. All right,
So I guess I'll go through
now
my good.
let's do happy dance stuff.
All right. Well,
So
do
three
one.
favorite units.
I'll do one for each of my factions just to make it easy to pick these things.
All
So
right.
the first one you already mentioned that just to fix balance, taking the mutts down a notch by
Huh?
not giving every profile every single piece of equipment in the book.
Mm-hmm.
You can only have your jammer and then your and no smoke grenades usually, or
Mm-hmm.
you've got to go up to a higher point level to get both.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more reasonable. Plus the fact that you're just not going to take so many irregulars now stops Hackers Land from being as broken by just piling on 4 mutts into every army,
Mm-hmm.
which causes a giant nightmare for your opponent.
Yeah. So it's not as
So
broken anymore. Yeah.
because before it cost no points, and they would have unlimited shots with their jammer,
Mm-hmm.
and they had all the equipment in the world.
And you could fit them all in because they're only 20 points. So you could bring your main army and then just have 4 of them or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that changed. Back over to combined. I like what happened to Unidrons, which even though their points didn't change much and their weapons only changed a little bit, and that they no longer produce teardrops off their plasma, they produce circular templates off the plasma.
Uh-huh.
The whole changes to the prone rules. The remotes can now go prone.
Mm-hmm.
Now makes Unidrons so much better
Mm-hmm.
that normally it was impossible to hide an Onyx army
Yeah.
with an Unidron Link team and a bunch of other remotes because
Mm-hmm.
there wouldn't be enough spots on in your deployment zone that
Yep.
covered tall things.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up having to like being really restricted in where you could deploy.
Yeah.
But
So if
now
they
that you
broke your Unidrons, they would break the entire 5-man unit as opposed to like a normal link where you break one guy and everyone else is hiding or able to hide better because they don't have to go because they can go prone.
yeah, and now when they shoot one down because you've got remote presence,
Mm-hmm.
that they would be able to finish it off because it would keep standing up as
Oh
a
my god,
remote.
this is gonna be so annoying.
Yes, this is why I'm naming why this will be really good for the winning.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I again, this
Well,
is like
yeah,
robot
before everybody,
pro robot bias.
mhm.
Humans.
Before
Yeah.
people took them really seriously, they weren't like, that's just Unidrons. They're actually pretty freaked out about the fact that they might go on a turn 3 rampage when
Mm-hmm.
there's only 3 left and just begin plasming away the whole army.
Yep.
Now there may be even too many left to go on that rampage.
That's fair. I
So
guess
all
you know what. That's a good
coming
point.
back.
That's a huge buff.
So I'm excited to see how that causes a level up on them. And then to
Mhm.
go to the third army of Druze, I really like what happened to Scarface. Because
Okay.
before he had 2 profiles, and they weren't quite as loaded up with stuff, and he wasn't quite as buff. But
Mm-hmm.
now with the armor increase and a bit of a point decrease. And he's gone, I think before he had, I don't know if he had a DEP before or not, but it's now, he's got the Panzerfaust, and then AP, HMG, or Spitfire, which are quite powerful weapons.
He gained an AP HMG and the AP Spitfire is new. He didn't have those profiles before.
Yeah, so now that armor is going to be a thing on the board.
Yeah.
Now that you want to take bigger things, I think Scarface is going to be like a seriously useful piece of equipment to bring.
And I love his. Yep.
Yeah, and in Druze, you can link with either duels with Cordelia, or there's wild card options, or a brawler. So
yep. I like also the fact that I just love the fact that like he can frenzy and just punch a guy if needed in the face to destroy him. That like it's just fun. Just have tags that punch people in the faces.
Yep. No, his CC went up as well. So like the beat down he can deliver in many, many ways is going to be.
And neat. I think he used to only have assault. Now he has berserk. So he literally is just like, well, I'm a tag. You can hit me, but I'm going to hit you back.
Yeah, okay, ninja, have fun poking me. As long as you're not opening on with monofilament.
Yeah, exactly. Then exactly. You punch me, I'm gonna berserk you. We'll go mano a mano and see who wins, which is fun. All right. Is that good, or you got anything more?
No, those are the three. One from each again.
Okay.
Some were fun improvements. Scarface was kind of fun. The Unidrons are just pure power, and then the Mutts are fixing the game.
All right. That's a good spread. For me, most of my things are just about things that are new and exciting and cool. So I am going to do some, because you mentioned that, and I was like, oh, I should talk about things I was really happy about. Some of my favorites were, I think I mentioned the posthumans. They got nerfed. These are honorable mentions. I'm just throwing in extra things. I love the fact that the posthumans went up in price, and they were so obviously too good before. And then I like the Fide. I always felt like the Fide was a little bit underwhelming in close combat, and kind of got a little bit better in close combat. So I like that. But my real number 3, I guess that's number 5 and 4. My number 3
in the deployment zone too.
Sorry.
Now it can go suppressive in the deployment zone if you roll your 15.
That's true. If you want to reveal it. Yeah, that's interesting. My number 3 is Gulams. So they
now have fake chain rifles, or is it something else?
Both. The fact that they have fake chain rifles. So they have shotguns basically changed to be either you hit them directly with a +6 and 8 inches, or you shoot a scatter shot, which is a template. First of all, theme-wise and fluff-wise, I love that. I think fluff-wise, it's great.
Yep. Again, for new players, when you describe why the shotgun worked like that, they're like, what weapon is this?
And you're like, it's the future. This is just how shotguns work in the future, okay? Now it makes a lot more sense, which I love. It's more intuitive for people to understand. It's great. So you're basically hitting them with short slugs, or you're hitting them with scatter shot. And Gulams have them, and because of the way that Gulams work, right? Gulams are they're your line infantry, which is basically just supposed to hold the line against the enemy so that they can't just walk around in your deployment zone and also give you orders, right? The ability to give them templates is so good in terms of defense for like people trying to sneak around a infiltrating camo or someone to go and deal with you. So I really like that. And then on top of that, for some reason, they went down 1 point. And I was
it's really good. Your opponent can't just win face-to-face over and over. Like, oh, I'll just take my Spitfire and shoot this guy, then shoot that guy.
Yeah.
They can't just go around the corner and take everybody out.
So I love that portion. And the fact that they're 1 point less for no reason, like, I'll take it. And I love the Gulam models. So I got to always throw in some love for them. My number 2 is the Mobile Regatta. So this is like the quintessential heavy infantry almost for the game alongside the Orc, right? So this is the Nomad heavy infantry. And I always felt like the Mobile Regatta, like people love the look because it's so unique and interesting. But the Mobile Regatta themselves were just not good enough. They were too expensive, and they suffered from all these overpriced things. Like the multi-rifle is overpriced, the armor was overpriced, and it was just too expensive for how good it was. And they
so before
basically
people would put like one in the link of Agusiles if they were playing Corregidor, just because the linking bonuses would make it good enough to play with. But once they'd filled up one slot, they wouldn't take any more.
Yeah, and they'd also take it with the HMG because unlike the multi-rifle, the HMG was correctly priced, right?
Yeah.
So now though, like because multi-rifle is well priced and generally heavy armor has gone down and everything, the Mobile Regatta still is when you look at the profile, it's not complicated, right? It's
abilities like we were talking about before. That things have like 12 abilities now. Nope, it's got courage, immune shock, and there you go.
That's it, right? But it has a 6-2 move, so it got the benefit of being faster. It got its weapon multi-rifle it just has 2 weapons, multi-rifle and flamer, which is like interesting but dynamic because they do what you need to do. And then it also went up 1 armor, which is so cool. So I feel like when you see a Mobile Regatta, right, when there are a lot of them out there because they look so cool, you're like, oh, I'm worried because this guy's high armor, he's moves fast, he's just like a good, strong, like when you think of heavy infantry, this is the heavy infantry you'll measure other heavy infantry against. And he's relatively, like he's aggressively costed. It's like 35
and the flamethrower version, you're not going to want to run the flamethrower version to get him with your shotguns.
Yeah.
He's going to flamethrower you, and he's going to, and your little dude's going to die. So you've got to fight him on his terms.
Yeah. So I think this is the kind of units that I would hope they push. Not so many special rules. You don't need a ton of special rules. Just make the rules they have interesting and good and well priced. So this is like, it's just a great looking unit. The same thing with the Gulam, right? Not too many special rules, but it's just what its package it has is interesting. And so I really like the Mobile Regatta. And number 1 actually has a shit ton of rules. So I can't say that it is like it looks like the best, but it is my favorite, one of my favorite models in the entire range. And
actually, because it looks.
It's basically probably specifically because of the look. Mm-hmm. It's basically, when I say favorite models in the range, I mean the look. So like, this is one of my favorite models. This is one of the things that made me like really, really love Infinity. It's the Guaija or Guaijia or whatever the fuck, however you say it. This model is like has looked so good for so long. He's again, like I'm saying, he's the big tag, right? He's a big robot, and he's just, when they resculpted him, he just looks so sweet. He's not like overly ornate or whatever. He looks like, again, a quintessential tag, right? And I loved him. He looked great. However, he ran around with a sword before, and he kind of sucked in close combat before. A lot. So you're like, why is this guy holding his sword and like holstering his gun when he's terrible in close combat? Like, and they kind of tweaked him to be a little bit better in N3, at the end of N3. Like they made his weapon a little bit stronger. But then, I don't know, something happened in N4, and they're like, you know what? People love this model. Let's just make him awesome. So they literally just changed him so that he's awesome in close combat now. So his weapon is double action, and they gave him martial arts, and they gave him a buff to be basically, like I said, that elite level of close combat. So he's like close combat 20, I think it was from 19 to 22. And anything over 20 is a huge buff. It's like worth 2 more points because you get to add it to your roll. And then they also gave him martial arts level 2, which means you get another +3 and a -3 on your opponent's roll, which means he's like super good in close combat. Plus he's still 8 armor, which means like, again, you're going to be running into people and just like punching them over. And if you fail, like it doesn't really matter because, you know, you have 8 armor. They're not going to hurt you in response. So I love the idea of punching people in close combat. And then on top of that, because besides the points decrease, so it's actually significantly cheaper, like 9 points cheaper. That is apparently not enough. And because in the comic books that they released with Guaijias, the Guaijias were jumping around, and like there's a scene where Guaijia jumps onto a plane and like smashes it with its fist. Apparently they had to model that, so now Guaijias have super jump, which means they're now kung fu robots. They're so awesome. They jump. You can like literally. The thing I'm looking most forward to is like Superman punching a guy in the face.
Oh, just jumping on a roof and like stomping on it. Just jumping.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's what I want to do. So that's that's the thing, that the unit. So not only is it beautiful, which I guess is, that's nothing to do with N4. It was released in N3, but it was so beautiful. But now that its rule set like lives up to its model and acts the way that you would hope it does in the fluff and the art.
Yeah, I agree that good-looking models should just play better as well. Things like Mukhtar that have ugly models should play badly.
Yeah, exactly. What, are you healing the ground? What is wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, obviously, not that useful if that's the best you can do. So so those were my top 3, technically top 5, but yeah. All right. So I think it's about time. We've been going on for a long time. Do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I guess if you want to contact us about what they're.
Oh wait! I just wrap up first about N4. Any last thoughts I meant about N4?
I want to see the ITS missions to see if there's like some interesting theme going on in them. But every season there's sort of a theme, but they might not do a theme this time because the edition's just newly established.
Yeah,
but those have a big change on how the game plays. So
yeah,
I expect them to be pretty similar though. Honestly,
okay.
It looks like they're trying not to rock the boat.
Okay, for me, I think overall, I guess I've talked a lot. I feel like I've been really negative about the game, but honestly, I've been really excited and about actually playing. Like I said, I really like Code 1, but there are those couple of things that are kind of missing that I really want, like defensive play, suppressive fire, these kind of things, and of course, like a super badass Guaigia that I'm really looking forward to in the new edition. Overall, I would say this is probably still going to, like, everything that I liked about Infinity. Almost everything that was every change that they did was good. There's just, like I said, a bunch of things that I wish they had gone a little bit further. And there's that one thing that they added that I didn't like, which was, but in general, the direction is great. I liked Infinity before N3. I'm gonna like it. I'm sure I'm going to love it with the new edition, and I think this is probably the best time to jump into Infinity if you haven't played before. Like, a lot of the things that I'm grumbling about is literally just like old man Infinity because I've been playing it for so long, and it's like, why didn't they fix those things that have been bugging me for so long, right?
The complaints aren't about the core rules at all. They're all
exactly, right? And I feel like general direction is good, especially like the big thing to me is like if they make link teams, if they change link teams enough that it's not like so jarring to play. Like, I really don't like the way the bonuses work and everything, but if they change it to be more streamlined, more like everything else, I will have a lot more, in my opinion, like positive things, because literally link teams is the thing that bugs me most because it's so jarring and it's so hard to explain to new players and get people to work through. It's the hardest thing to work through in the game. So and that's positive. Like we talked about, it's not part of they didn't put it in the main packet, which means they're thinking about it. They're thinking about how they can change it to make it make more sense and make it more streamlined. So that is my thing that I'm hoping, positive things in the future. So you looking forward to playing N4 in the new year because of the lockdown? So basically it's becoming winter. We're not going to be able to play outside that much. And
play outside, whatever.
Yeah, sure. We'll put on our winter hats and everything like that, clear the snow off and start playing. Yeah, I guess we'll have to. So great. That was N4.
Yep.
So now, last things.
About what?
I don't know, wrap up in general.
Oh, that people have sort of found other things that have changed majorly, or that they think have major implications on how the game will play,
Mm-hmm.
drop us a line on Facebook.
Yeah. Tell us what you think.
Tell us what
Do
you
you
think made the biggest change to how the game will play.
Yeah, what do you love? And if you disagree with us and you think we're stupid, definitely drop us a line and talk with us because we love to debate. This is like one of our favorite things. So I'm sure that
because we're master
sorry?
tacticians. Because we're of course master tacticians.
Yeah, both in battlefield and verbal combat. So all right.
Very high.
Strategy, yes.
Definitely
all
over
right.
13. Okay. Well,
all right. This has been Alan.
It's been Brandon.
Okay, done.
We're at the end.
If you want to reach out to us, you can find us on Facebook at Dice Over Everything. Join our group at Dice Over Everything Group, or you can email us at contact@diceovereverything.com.
Yeah, and if you want to see what we're working on, you can go to diceovereverything.com.
So, yeah, that's it.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.